Hey, it's Paulie. Thanks for listening in to my conversation with former Buzzcocks drummer John Maher. You may not know, but John is an ace photographer and a sought-after Volkswagen engineer, mechanic, and drag racer. He spoke to me from his shop on the Isle of Harris in Scotland's Outer Hebrides. And what was originally intended to be just a 20-minute chat turned into over an hour-long conversation. So this Rock N Roll Oblivion will be broken up into a couple of segments. In this first, we'll discuss upcoming Buzzcocks vinyl releases, Pete Shelley's memorial concert scheduled June 21st at Royal Albert Hall, his early days with Buzzcocks, and drumming influences. But we got started right out of the gate talking about a photo on his Instagram, johnmar.photo, where as a young musician touring the United States for the first time, he inadvertently documented graffiti tags from artist Jean-Michel Basquiat as he was operating in New York City at that time under the tag Samo.
Yeah, I just saw your thing on Facebook earlier, the cool link to the Basquiat thing, which I thought was quite original.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to ask you that. That's something I just, popped across when I was looking at your Instagram, and I was, I guess we'll get into that, but I was kind of figuring that had to be an accident. That was so early with Basquiat. There's like no way you could have. I'm thinking you're taking the picture of the kids there on the stoop, and that just happened to be there.
Yeah, totally. I didn't even know that tag was his until somebody. I just dug back through a load of old photographs not that long ago, a few months ago, and then started sticking a few of them up on Instagram. And then it was somebody who commented on the picture that pointed that out. And then, of course, I thought, wow, really? And then I looked into it myself and read up a bit about it. So if I hadn't put the picture on and that person hadn't commented on it, I'd have been none the wiser. I just thought it was a cool pic with those kids in it.
I guess you've probably scoured the rest of those photos to see if you maybe had another one in there too, huh?
Yes, yeah. I didn't find anything else. Mostly just your usual New York street. Well, it wasn't just New York, it was wherever we went in America on that first tour. I'd actually bought that camera specifically for, because we were going on that trip and I wanted to come home with some photographs.
I've kind of jumped ahead of myself on where we were going to start because there's all sorts of things I wanted to ask you about. Yeah, okay. I was kind of assuming, when I saw those photos and those dates, I was like, well, this had to have been when you came over. I think it was the first time the Buzzcocks came to the United States, 1979. Those had to be taken during that tour.
Yes, the idea was that we didn't actually have any proper record releases in the States at that time, and we got that deal with IRS Records, Miles Copeland's thing, and the plan was that when we went over for our first visit to New York, to America, which I think was around about, if I'm right, about September 79. It was supposed to have coincided with the release of that album, but of course, the usual nonsense that goes on. The album wasn't actually ready. It didn't come out till maybe a month or 6 weeks later or something. So it was still good, though. It was still good. So we ended up going back again a few 2-3 months later, even. Before the end of 79, we were back again for a short trip.
And we're talking about this Singles Going Steady album, which is really the introduction to a lot of the United States to the Buzzcocks. Certainly the first Buzzcocks album I think I heard. I'm a generation removed from the punk generation. I'm in my mid-40s, so I was like a really little kid when that was going on. So I came to the Buzzcocks kind of after the fact, and that was the album that really got me into you guys. So, and I think that's probably the case for most Americans because it's the earlier albums that came out in the UK weren't available over here.
Yeah, that's right. So it was really only the really keen punk people in America that were maybe able to get hold of the other albums on import. And then I don't actually know who came up with the idea of making, because basically Singles Going Steady amounts to, effectively it's a compilation album, isn't it? It's like the first 8 singles that we did on United Artists. It's all the A-sides are on one side and all the B-sides are on the other. But been made aware of it just recently, in fact, because, of course, Domino Records over here are re-releasing Singles Going Steady next month. So there's a whole new, it's been remastered, and they've put a little booklet together about it, and they've run a few things by me to get info and stuff, so I'm aware of what's going on with it. And then, of course, you see various people reviewing Singles Going Steady again, and there's various people saying that it's one of the best compilation albums. I don't know. I mean, compilation albums always seem a bit naff to me, but actually Singles Going Steady seems to have proved to be a very smart move by whoever's idea it was to do it that way, to introduce Buzzcocks to the American public. It just made for what became a great album, I suppose.
And that was one of the things I discovered, too, in just researching things to speak with you today. I had no idea that release was coming up, so I'm pretty excited about that, too. I'm a vinyl connoisseur, and that's something I've never owned on actual vinyl, so I'm going to snap one of those up, too. As far as the remixes go...
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, as far as the remixes go, what was the impetus on that? What was done to the recordings, and why was that done? Why did they just not, re-put it back out?
Well, yeah, they're not actually remixed. It's exactly the same mix as before. What all they've done is they've taken the original 1/4-inch tape, which was obviously they were all recorded on 2-inch tape originally, then mixed down to the 1/4-inch master that was then used to make the original album. And so what they have done is the remastering is, well, the way I understand it, not that I'm completely, savvy on all that stuff, but it's kind of like they've put that back through a graphic equalizer, in simple terms, and just enhanced it. It's like someone's just twiddled the tone control a little bit on it, so it's not actually remixed. It's just probably I know for sure that, like, for instance, our first album, which Domino released last year, the remastered version of that, I feel, is definitely superior to the original. It sounds less tinny. It's got more depth to it. And I've not analysed Single Going Steady to the same level, but my feeling is that the people at Domino who have sort of taken care of that just have made it that little bit better than it was originally. So I'm quite happy that they've done that to it, rather than just put it out exactly the same as what it was before.
So as far as the first one you're talking about, it's the Spiral Scratch EP that I noticed sadly was sold out. They're going to have to repress that. Yeah.
Right.
Let's jump over to the show that's coming up on June 21st at Royal Albert Hall. I'm thinking, from what I saw, this was a regularly scheduled Buzzcocks gig, and with the passing of Pete, it's pretty much turned into a tribute with a lot of people coming together to support the band and his memory that night at Royal Albert Hall.
Yeah, well, that gig was originally scheduled nearly a year ago, because I remember seeing the announcement of it and thinking, wow, they're announcing that a long way ahead of time. And then it became apparent the main motivator behind putting that gig on was to act as like a promotional event for the release of Singles Going Steady. And, well, there's 2 albums coming out. In fact, it's the last studio album, A Different Kind of Tension, and Singles Going Steady, are both being released simultaneously next month. And so the Royal Albert Hall show was to serve as a promo for that, really. But then, of course, sadly Pete died there just before Christmas last year. And I suppose, of course, the thing is, if Pete hadn't died and the gig was to just go ahead as originally intended, I probably wouldn't have been a part of it, because I've not actually played live with Buzzcocks for many, many years, and they've been touring around with a different drummer and a different bass player to the original lineup for some time. But this has turned into something quite different now now that Pete's died, and they've gone this route of inviting various guest singers in to handle his songs, and seems sensible to make the whole thing a tribute to the man and his songwriting talent, I guess.
Oh, yeah. And Pete, to me, was one of the brilliant songwriters of not just punk rock, but of rock and roll. I think as far as a lyricist, he's right up there with Lennon and McCartney and Mercury and Bowie. I mean, Pete Shelley, to me, is just, as far as lyrics go, absolutely peerless. It's really a shame that you always celebrate too late, when you can't have everybody there. I think it's very cool that Steve Garvey is going to be joining you guys. I think you and Steve have been friends and are still friends for years now. So that's going to be really cool to see him on stage. When was the last time you performed with him?
Last time myself and Steve Garvey were on stage together was back in 2012 when there were two reunion gigs, reuniting the original lineup. That's 7 years ago. And I spoke to Steve just a few weeks ago about this upcoming gig, just to check in, really, because we don't really maintain regular contact with each other. I mean, it's been like that with all of the band, really, for many years. But of course, with something important like this coming up, it's makes sense to just check in with him and see, what songs do you want to do, any you don't want to do, anything you definitely want to do, and so on. And last I heard from Steve was via the manager, actually, and apparently Steve Garvey is really, really looking forward to this. Really, he's quite excited about it, which is great.
Are you guys going to get a chance to rehearse, or are you just going to, is he getting off the airplane and you guys are jumping on stage and you're just going to do it?
Well, I believe Steve Garvey's coming over maybe up to a little over a week before the gig. As it stands at the moment, I'm going down, the gig's on a Friday. I'm going to go down on the Wednesday, 2 days beforehand. Hopefully all well, trained up on the songs that I'm going to participate in, so that I should hopefully be able to just sit in. We will have a rehearsal, but obviously with only 2 days beforehand, it's not going to be super in-depth, but sort of relying on that. It's a bit like riding a bike. You never forget how to do it.
Right. I'm assuming you're going to be playing with Penetration as well.
Well, no, there's no plans to play with Penetration. A few people have asked me that because, of course, I did do an album with them back in 2015 and did a handful of gigs with them as well. But I haven't actually played live with Penetration since it's in 2015, I think. They've got a drummer in that has been doing gigs with them now for a good few years. So I'm assuming they'll be doing their own thing. But the great thing is, of course, Pauline will be joining Buzzcocks on stage to sing. I think she's going to do "Love You More," at least one track anyway. So if I'm not playing with Penetration in any shape or form, I will at least be performing on stage with Pauline on a Buzzcocks track.
That's going to be fantastic. I wish I wasn't separated from this show by an entire ocean. I mean, there's going to be some cool people there. Tim Burgess from the Charlatans, Captain Sensible, and Dave Vanian from the Damned, and a whole bunch of other folks. I know Howard Devoto's name has to have popped up in people talking to you and asking you about this. Is that even a possibility? Or is maybe that's the surprise we can't talk about, fingers crossed?
Well, I don't know if there's anything we're not supposed to talk about, but my understanding is that Howard won't actually be at the gig. I think he is planning to make some kind of, record a message or possibly a video or something. One of those things at the Oscars when somebody says, "I'm afraid I can't be with you tonight." So if he's not actually there in person, he'll be represented in some shape or form. But exactly what, I don't know.
Sure. Have you any idea what he's up to nowadays?
Well, apparently he's pretty much withdrawn from music altogether, and I believe he's living in Thailand.
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
So pretty much removed from the whole thing, really. And I think that's. I can't even say I really knew much about Howard when I was in the band with him. Way back, he was always kind of a man of mystery, and he remains that way to this day, I think.
And let's go back
to me, at least.
Let's go back to Pete just a little bit. When did you guys first come into contact? How did you meet Pete Shelley? What was your first introduction to him?
The very first time I met Pete was the first rehearsal that I was invited around. What had happened was there'd been an advert. I responded to an advert in one of the music papers. There was a girl looking to join up with various musicians and just kind of basically muck around and try and learn stuff together. It was pitched very much as a beginner's thing. So that suited me because I'd only been playing drums about 6 weeks at this point, and I needed to get the drum kit out of the house because the neighbours were complaining. And I rang, I called her, and I can't remember the exact story, but it was something like she actually turned out to be a drummer. And she somehow got the impression that I was a more advanced drummer than her, and she said, well, if anybody's rings me and they're looking for a drummer, I'll put them on to you. And of course, Howard saw the advert. He rang her. She gave him my number. Howard called round to my house one lunchtime. I was back from school, having done an exam in the morning. I was about to go back to do an exam in the afternoon. Howard called round, had a quick chat with him. He invited me, he gave me the address to come to the following Saturday. It was actually his basement flat in a place in Salford. And I went, my dad took me and my drum kit over there. We carried the drum kit down the stairs to Howard's basement flat, and in that room there, a room with no windows, lay on a mattress on the floor with Pete Shelley wearing a pair of shades and smoking a cigarette with a guitar, strumming away his guitar. So that was my introduction to Pete Shelley.
And it's like 5 or 6 weeks later, you're in the band and you guys are opening for the Sex Pistols.
That's right. Right from that first rehearsal, they were due to support the Sex Pistols at a gig that had taken place about a week before I first met them, but they weren't able to do it because they didn't have a band. They didn't have the full band together.
Right. The infamous Free Trade Hall show. Is that what you're talking about?
The Free Trade Hall in Manchester. It was one of the main venues in Manchester where pretty much any sizable band who came to Manchester, that was more or less the venue they would play. It was a capacity of about 2,500, but the venue we played was actually it was called the Lesser Free Trade Hall, which was up on the upper floor, which was a small theatre, probably maximum capacity of about 400. And Pete and Howard had arranged the gig just purely to get the Sex Pistols to come up to Manchester. And then, of course, Malcolm McLaren said, well, if we're going to come up, you get your band together and you be on the same bill with us. So right from that first rehearsal that I had with Pete and Howard and Steve Diggle, the goal was to be ready in time for that second visit of the Sex Pistols, which took place in July the 20th, 76, that was. And we were, I don't know if we were ready, but we did it. And it's kind of everything took off from there, really.
I'm really impressed, too, that you've had 3 stages in your life where you've decided you were going to do something and then just went out and executed it so well, so quickly. A teenage drum phenomenon with Buzzcocks. You went out and made a name in Volkswagen engineering and drag racing, and then later on in photography. I'm thinking that as far as Buzzcocks go and the drumming, there must have been an awful lot of youthful hubris, just kind of like a no-fear situation. I'm just going to go for it.
I think that was a massive part in it, I had kind of decided that for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to give drums a go. I tried a guitar and I kind of realised I wasn't going to be very good at it. So the drum kit thing came about because, for one, it seemed like it would be a much easier way of getting into a band because you look in the music press and the guitarists were 10 a penny, but there was lots of adverts for people wanting drummers rather than drummers. It was the other way around for the guitarists. It was guitarists were placing adverts saying, I want to join a band, So anyway, I would probably give credit to the fact that, yes, I was enthusiastic about wanting to play drums, but because I ended up joining Buzzcocks so very soon after acquiring a drum kit, it was just like being thrown in at the deep end, and they said, well, we've got this song, they count it in, and then you just have to blast along with it, and you kind of either keep up or you get left behind. And it was I think that it's a fantastic way to learn, that if I had just been sat in a cellar somewhere or a rehearsal room on my own trying to learn to play, obviously, you practice and you get better, you pick up a few techniques and that, but it doesn't beat suddenly just somebody throwing you into a band and saying, right, let's go. And it's a great way to learn how to play, I think, just in the right place at the right time.
As far as your drumming goes, was there anybody particular in mind, or that was an influence to you when you started playing, or even after you started playing? Did you think, well, I'm going to nick a little bit of this here and there?
Yeah, well, when I first got into playing drums, and even prior to getting the drum kit, because I was sort of doing a little bit of air drumming in my parents' front room before I got the kit. So, working out, well, how do you set a kit up? Why are they placed the way they are, and so on and so on. So I wasn't aware of punk rock at all at this stage. I hadn't even heard of the Sex Pistols, let alone Buzzcocks. So I was listening to stuff like Black Sabbath. There was a sort of jazz rock band from Holland called Solution that I really liked. I went to see that. They were supporting, I think it was somebody like Blue Oyster Cult. I went to see Blue Oyster Cult at the Free Trade Hall a few months before I joined Buzzcocks, and they had this support band Solution there, and I just thought the drummer was absolutely incredible. And of course, I went out and bought their records after that, and I was trying to. His playing was way more advanced than, it definitely wasn't a punk rock style drumming, but I think what I learned from his style of playing was just the way that what he played fit with the melody, and he wasn't just keeping time. What I call a very musical form of drumming. I think that was a definite influence. And then when I actually got into Buzzcocks, I would sometimes, there might be little snippets of stuff that I'd catalogued in my brain from listening to stuff like that jazz rock guy, and I wouldn't be able to play it the way he played it, but I would do my own little weird simplified version that I thought would fit with the songs. And then ultimately, probably one of the big influences for me was when I heard the first Blondie LP, and Clem Burke's strumming on that. Clem Burke's just a fantastic drummer.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
again,
yeah.
he, I really like that Blondie first album, and I played that to death. And there are bits that I've kind of nicked off of that appear in Buzzcocks tracks, although again, it would take a nerd to realise what they were, but there were certainly influences there, and I really liked. Again, he had a very musical way of playing. What he plays it fits the tune, and as I've said before, you could probably give me a whole list, all those songs off that Blondie album. If you took everything away but the drums, I'd know straight away what track he was playing. You could almost hear Debbie's vocal melody in what he's playing as well. So, and plus, even down to the way he set his drum kit up, and Clem was a big influence then, because it was far more similar in a way to what we were playing than anything like a jazz rock band would do. So, that kind of style of playing I just thought was fantastic. And plus, when you saw him play live, he's actually potentially more entertaining to watch than Debbie Harry was almost.
Well, almost. John Maher of Buzzcocks, hanging on the telephone from the Isle of Harris in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. More conversation with John coming up. We'll talk about Volkswagens, drag racing in the Outer Hebrides, and John's photography on the next Rock N Roll Oblivion. I'm Paul Meacham, speaking to you from an island on the other side of the Atlantic, St. Simon's Island, Georgia. And thanks for listening.